Right now, sitting inside your tissues are, well, millions of what scientists quite literally call zombie cells.
Yeah, it sounds like sci-fi, but it is actually very real.
Right. They refuse to die, they refuse to do their actual jobs, and worst of all, they are actively poisoning the healthy cells around them.
Which is exactly what drives the breakdown we all fear.
You know, usually when we think about getting older, we picture a ticking clock. We imagine this relentless, unstoppable countdown and just assume we are all, just along for the ride.
Right, a passenger in your own body.
Exactly. But when you actually sit down and look at the clinical science on longevity, that whole chronological picture just kind of shatters.
It completely falls apart.
Yeah. You realize that aging isn't really about the pages of a calendar turning. It is actually a biological accumulation of systemic errors, of cellular fatigue, and metabolic dysfunction.
That is the core of it, yeah.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring a fascinating stack of clinical research today for you, and our mission is to figure out how to combat premature aging from the inside out. We are looking at the very architecture of your biology.
And we really have to shift entirely away from that chronological view of aging. If getting older were simply a ticking clock, we would be entirely powerless.
Right, there'd be nothing to discuss.
Exactly. But because aging is largely driven by biological mechanisms, processes that can actually be turned on or off, we actually have a massive amount of power to command our own biology.
Which is incredibly empowering.
It really is. Today, we're going to frame this entire exploration around two profound mechanisms happening inside you at this very second. The first is cellular senescence, which is the underlying problem.
The bad guy, basically.
Right. And the second is a mechanism called autophagy, which serves as the cure.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can talk about reversing the aging process, we really need to understand exactly what is breaking down in the body. We need to identify these villains inside us.
We do.
If I'm just going about my normal day, eating, breathing, walking around, what is actually happening to my cells?
To understand the breakdown, you have to look at the immense metabolic stress your cells are under every single second. Just the standard production of energy in your body creates stress.
Like exhaust from a car.
Very much like that. When your mitochondria generate the energy you need to simply exist, they produce free radicals as a byproduct. Then you add in, environmental toxins, UV radiation, the highly processed foods we digest.
So it's just constant wear and tear.
Constant. Microscopic wear and tear. Over time, certain cells sustain profound, irreversible damage to their DNA and to their structural proteins.
But wait, if our cells are taking that much of a beating just from basic bodily functions, how are we not just, walking piles of broken tissue by the time we hit our 20s?
That is a great question.
Does the body have a built-in security system to clear out the damaged ones before they cause problems?
It does. And under normal circumstances, it actually works beautifully. It's a highly regulated process called apoptosis.
Apoptosis.
Right, which is essentially programmed cell death. When a healthy cell detects that its DNA is too corrupted to repair, it initiates a self-destruct sequence.
Oh, wow. It just takes itself out.
Exactly. It cleanly breaks itself down so the immune system can clear it away. It basically sacrifices itself for the greater good of the surrounding tissue.
But clearly, based on the research we're looking at today, something goes wrong with that security system. Some of these cells don't sacrifice themselves.
Right, and that is the biological glitch at the heart of aging. Some of these severely damaged cells refuse to undergo apoptosis. They survive the damage, but they enter this bizarre, suspended state of dysfunction.
The zombie state.
Yes, they stop dividing, and they can no longer do their intended jobs. We call this state cellular senescence.
So these are the zombie cells. They are essentially undead, just taking up space in our tissue. But reading through these sources, it seems like they aren't just sitting there quietly, right?
Not at all.
They are actively doing harm to the surrounding area.
Far from quiet, yeah. Senescent cells secrete something called SASP, which stands for senescence-associated secretory phenotype.
Which sounds highly technical and honestly kind of terrifying.
It is a bit of both. What it essentially means is that these zombie cells constantly pump out a highly toxic cocktail of inflammatory molecules, cytokines, and proteases.
So they're just leaking poison?
Basically, yes. These secretions literally degrade the extracellular matrix. That is the scaffolding that holds your tissues together. They damage the neighboring healthy cells and create localized inflammation.
Wow.
So when you look in the mirror and see prematurely aging sagging skin, or when you experience profound cognitive fatigue and joint pain as you get older, you are feeling the direct physical effects of SASP.
Man, so these zombie cells are basically like a terrible roommate who refuses to move out.
I like that.
Right. They stop paying rent, they stop doing their chores, and they constantly trash the apartment, which completely ruins the living situation for all the good roommates trying to keep the place clean.
What's fascinating here is that analogy perfectly captures the cascading effect of senescence. Because that local bad roommate effect doesn't just stay in one apartment.
It spreads.
Right. The localized tissue damage eventually triggers systemic, body-wide inflammation over decades. The damage seeps out into the hallway, attracts the attention of your immune system, and eventually rots the entire building from the inside out.
Okay, so we have these toxic roommates accumulating over the course of our lives, trashing the building. The obvious question is, how does the body evict them?
We need a cleanup crew.
Exactly, which brings us to the biological hero of our story, the internal cleanup crew. Let's talk about autophagy.
Autophagy is one of the most highly conserved evolutionary mechanisms we possess. The word itself comes from Greek, auto meaning self, and phagy meaning to eat.
Self-eating.
Translates to self-eating, yes.
Which, sounds a bit alarming at first. You don't generally want your body eating itself, but it is actually the ultimate internal cellular recycling and cleaning process. How does it physically work inside the cell?
Well, when autophagy is activated, your cells form these specialized double membrane structures called autophagosomes.
Autophagosomes.
Right. You can visualize them as biological garbage nets that actively sweep through the intracellular environment. They are hunting for debris.
So they're literally catching the trash.
Precisely. They capture damaged proteins, oxidized lipids, and even entire dysfunctional organelles like those exhausted mitochondria we mentioned earlier. They gather up all the trash, including the damaged components from those senescent zombie cells.
And once they bag up all that garbage, they deliver it to the cell's incinerators, right?
Yeah.
The lysosomes?
Yes, the lysosomes. The autophagosome merges with a lysosome, which is packed with digestive enzymes.
Oh, wow.
The lysosome breaks all that damaged material down into basic raw amino acids and fatty acids. It essentially melts the cellular garbage down into fundamental building blocks so the body can use those exact same materials to build brand new, perfectly functioning cellular components.
I just love this concept. The sources we're reviewing use an incredible metaphor to make this mechanism crystal clear, and I want to share this manufacturing city metaphor with you, the listener.
It's a great visualization.
It really is. Imagine your physical body as a sprawling, highly advanced manufacturing city. Your cells are the individual factories within this city. They are working tirelessly day and night to produce energy and keep the city running.
But then, consider how the average person eats today in modern society. We consume snacks, large meals, sweetened beverages, essentially from the moment we wake up until the moment we go to sleep.
Right. So in our city metaphor, that constant eating is like an endless flood of delivery trucks dropping off new raw materials at the loading docks of our cellular factories.
Exactly.
And because these new resources are so abundantly available, the factory managers and the workers get incredibly lazy. If a machine breaks down or if waste products pile up on the factory floor, the workers don't bother fixing them. Why would they?
There's a brand new delivery truck pulling up right now.
Exactly. So they just push the broken machines and the garbage into the corner and keep building with the endless supply of new materials. Over decades, those factories become cluttered, inefficient, and highly toxic.
And that garbage piling up in the corner, that is the damaged proteins in the zombie cells causing premature aging.
So what's the actual biology behind those delivery trucks?
The biological equivalent of those endless delivery trucks is a highly sensitive nutrient sensing pathway called mTOR. That stands for mechanistic target of rapamycin.
mTOR.
Yes. Whenever we consume calories, especially proteins and carbohydrates, the mTOR pathway is continuously activated. It signals to the body that resources are endless.
Because food is constantly coming in.
Right. It is a pathway designed for growth, and when the body thinks resources are endless, the autophagy cleanup process is entirely shut down.
Wow, it just stops.
Completely.
Yeah.
There's absolutely no evolutionary incentive to spend energy recycling old parts when new parts are flooding in. So the factory workers never clean the floors.
Okay, so if constant eating keeps mTOR active and causes the garbage to pile up, the logical solution is to stop the delivery trucks. Stop the incoming food.
Right.
But wait, doesn't stopping the delivery trucks just mean we are starving the city? There is this massive mainstream myth out there that fasting just slows down your metabolism, burns your muscle tissue, and leaves you completely fatigued and weak.
I hear that all the time, and we need to draw a very hard clinical line between starvation and fasting, because blurring that line is exactly why so many people are afraid to tap into this mechanism.
They think they're starving themselves.
Exactly. But they are fundamentally different biological states. Starvation is the involuntary chronic absence of nutrients. It is a biological state of panic that eventually leads to the uncontrolled degradation of essential tissues just to keep the brain alive.
Right, that's survival mode.
Fasting, on the other hand, is deliberate and controlled. It is the intentional withholding of nutrients for a specific window of time to shift your biology from a state of constant growth to a state of profound repair.
So by deliberately halting the delivery trucks, by temporarily withholding calories, we inhibit that MTOR pathway.
You shut MTOR down completely. And when MTOR is inhibited, a new biological manager steps in. You activate an energy-sensing enzyme called AMPK, or adenosine monophosphate activated protein kinase.
AMPK. So MTOR is for growth, AMPK is for
Scarcity. If MTOR is the signal for abundance, AMPK is the alarm bell for scarcity. When AMPK detects that energy levels are dropping and no new food is coming in, it flips the switch on autophagy.
Nice.
It forces those factory workers to finally look at the garbage piled up in the corner, extract the useful parts from the broken machinery, and rebuild pristine equipment from the cellular trash.
Here is where it gets incredibly practical. Now that we understand these biological switches, MTR for growth and garbage accumulation and AMPK for cleanup and recycling, how do we practically flip those switches?
That's the best part.
Right. The clinical sources outline a very specific action plan. These are 3 zero-cost protocols you can implement in your daily life to command your biology without spending a single dime. Protocol number 1 is the 16-hour circadian fast.
This relies on time-restricted feeding, and it is the foundational method to stimulate autophagy. The protocol dictates waiting 16 hours between your last evening meal and your first meal the next day.
So that leaves you with a strict 8-hour eating window.
Yes. During those 16 hours, your insulin levels drop to baseline, and your liver slowly depletes its stored glucose, which is called glycogen.
So if you finish dinner at 8 p.m., you consume 0 calories until noon the next day. But there is a crucial detail here that trips so many people up, and I really want to push back on this on behalf of anyone listening.
Okay, let's hear it.
The sources say that during that 16-hour window, you can only consume purified water, black coffee, or plain green tea. That's it. No cream, no sugar. But wait, really? Even a tiny splash of almond milk in my morning coffee, it's only like 10 calories. Why is the body so incredibly sensitive to that?
It seems frustratingly strict, I know, but the body's sensitivity is tied to human evolution. We evolved in environments of extreme scarcity. Your liver stores about 100 grams of glycogen, which is your backup energy reserve.
Okay.
You have to burn through that reserve to trigger the AMPK alarm bell. When you introduce even a tiny splash of almond milk, those 10 calories enter the digestive tract. Your pancreas immediately releases insulin to manage those nutrients.
Even for 10 calories?
Even for 10 calories. That tiny spike in insulin sends a massive systemic signal to your liver, stop depleting the glycogen. New food has arrived.
Oh, wow, so it tricks the body.
Completely. The MTOR pathway instantly reactivates, the AMPK alarm bell turns off, and autophagy halts entirely. The factory workers drop their brooms and go back to the loading dock.
Man, just from a splash of milk.
Just from that. By maintaining a strict absolute zero-calorie fast, you ensure that the liver's glycogen stores remain depleted, which forces your body to maintain the deep cellular cleaning.
Which brings us to protocol number 2, which acts as an amplifier for this whole process. Fasted morning cardiovascular locomotion.
Right. When you wake up in the morning after sleeping, assuming you haven't eaten since dinner, your insulin levels naturally sit at their absolute lowest point.
Because you've been fasting all night.
Exactly. Your body is primed for what we call metabolic flexibility. That's the ability to seamlessly switch from burning glucose to burning stored fat and cellular waste.
Okay.
Before you break your fast at noon, the protocol suggests engaging in 30 to 45 minutes of steady-state cardio.
So we're talking about a brisk walk, a light jog, or cycling, just steady movement. Why steady state? Why not do an intense, heavy weightlifting session or high-intensity interval training to really push the body?
Because high-intensity training causes micro tears in your muscle fibers, which require a massive influx of external protein to repair.
which you don't have because you're fasting.
Right. If you do that while deep in a fast, your body doesn't have the raw materials to rebuild that muscle. Steady-state cardio, on the other hand, demands sustained energy from your muscles without causing structural damage.
I see.
You create an acute cellular energy crisis. The body looks around for fuel, but there are no delivery trucks and no major structural damage to prioritize. So it drastically upregulates the autophagy pathways to aggressively hunt down and burn damaged proteins for fuel.
Wow, so you turn a standard fast into a highly aggressive clearing event.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have the strict fast and we have fasted morning cardio. But I have to ask, is there any way to trigger this cleanup process without just extending a fast even longer? Like, is there a biological hack for someone who wants an extra edge but maybe doesn't want to skip lunch?
There is an alternative trigger, actually, and it brings us to protocol number 3, the temperature fluctuation protocol.
Well, this is the cold exposure stuff.
Yes. This relies on a fascinating biological concept called hormesis. Hormesis is the application of brief, intensely controlled environmental stress to trigger a profound healing and survival response in the body.
And the most accessible way to do this is with cold water. The research notes specify turning the water temperature to the absolute coldest setting possible at the very end of your normal morning shower. You literally stand under that freezing water for exactly 2 minutes.
It's not easy, but that acute, shocking drop in temperature forces your cells into a mild survival panic.
Right.
In response, they rapidly synthesize what are known as cold shock proteins. These proteins immediately seek out misfolded and damaged proteins throughout your body and either repair them or flag them for autophagic destruction.
That's incredible.
It really is. It activates the precise survival pathways that trigger cellular cleanup without requiring an extended caloric deficit.
And the clinical notes also mention that if you have access to a sauna, you can pair this up, alternating 15 minutes of intense heat with 2 minutes of extreme cold.
Yes, the heat introduces heat shock proteins, which act very similarly. Cycling between the two extremes is the ultimate environmental trigger.
Expanding and constricting.
Exactly. It forces the cardiovascular system to expand and constrict rapidly, pumping out dead cells. And it is particularly noted in the literature for its effectiveness at clearing senescent cells from the dermal layers.
Which physically tightens aging skin, right?
It does.
It's incredible how responsive our biology is to these specific behavioral triggers. We aren't just passengers. We are literally programming ourselves through our daily habits.
We really are.
You know, spending all this time unpacking these clinical sources, what really strikes me is how everyday language completely shifts. So what does this all mean? We throw words around all the time without thinking about what they mean on a microscopic level. Take the word damage, for instance. We usually think of damage as a scraped knee or a broken bone.
But on a cellular level, damage is the invisible, physical harm from environmental toxins and a constant diet of abundant, low-quality calories.
It's happening before you even know it.
Right. It is the impairment of cellular function long before you ever feel a symptom, which redefines the word process.
Right, because autophagy isn't a magic pill or a quick fix. It is a rigorous, demanding process, a natural series of biological steps taken to achieve internal healing.
And then there's the word repair. We think of repairing a car by putting new parts into it, but biological repair means restoring faulty systems using the debris of the old system.
Which is heavily reliant on deliberate, zero-calorie fasting and adequate sleep. Which brings us to recycle. Recycling isn't just about putting plastic bins out on the curb anymore.
Exactly. Biological recycling is the miraculous ability to convert toxic waste, in this case, dead zombie cells, into reusable, stronger tissues.
Which ultimately redefines the most important word of all, age.
Age is not the length of time you have lived. It is not the year on your birth certificate. It is the biological progression of accumulating cellular changes.
It is amazing. When you view these concepts through the lens of a microscope, everything changes. If we look at the overarching theme of this deep dive, it really comes down to agency. You hold the architectural blueprint to your own vitality.
You do.
By strategically utilizing fasting, steady-state movement, and thermal stress, you aren't just pausing the clock. You are actively commanding your biology to clear away the decay of the past to build a stronger, more resilient future. It really is an architectural process. We are tearing down the condemned, toxic buildings in our cellular cities so we can build gleaming new skyscrapers.
It is a profound architectural shift, and it raises an incredible philosophical question that the science inevitably leads us to.
Ooh, I like where this is going.
Think about the implications of this constant cellular turnover. If autophagy is constantly breaking down our damaged cells, melting them down into lysosomes, and recycling them into entirely new biological building blocks,
Yeah.
at what point are you physically an entirely different person than the one who started listening to this deep dive?
Wow. The ultimate biological ship of Theseus.
Precisely. If you replace every plank of wood on a ship, is it still the same ship? And if you are constantly rebuilding yourself from scratch day after day, cell by cell, what kind of raw materials do you want to provide for your next iteration?
That is a wild thought to sit with. You literally are what you recycle. We started today talking about how aging feels like a ticking clock, an inevitable, terrifying countdown. But hopefully you now see that the chronological clock isn't in charge. You are. The blueprint is in your hands, and the internal cleanup crew is just waiting for your signal. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep learning, stay curious, and we will catch you next time.